Booktopia TV. I'm Andrew Cattanach. I'm so lucky to be joined here with one of my personal heroes and certainly a voice in everyone's lounge rooms for years. He's been in the game of rugby league for a long time now, and he's now the author of a book, The Voice. It's Ray Warren. Ray, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
But it's been an amazing career that you've had, and I really enjoyed the book. It must have been a really rewarding experience going back and thinking about all those things.
Yeah, I think it brought a lump to the throat a couple of times when I started talking about mum and dad, you know, and remembering now that I'm old enough to understand what they went through and the hardships that they had, that they gave up a lot of things that us kids, 7 of us, were able to do what we wanted to do in life. And I, of course, being the baby of the family, I came up with this idea that I wanted to be a sports commentator, and I think that was beyond them really. If you can imagine, it's 1947-48, and they've got a crazy son that wants to be a sports commentator. But we got across the line. But where I come from in Junee, of course, you went to work on the railway, whether you liked it or not. You went to work on the railway. Yeah,
and you lived near the railway, didn't you? Your mum was very proud of her place in railway history.
Oh, what about that? Yeah, that's a good question. I wasn't born at the time, but they were out at a little place called Brushwood on the road out towards Hay and those sort of places. And there's a silo, obviously, because it's a grain-growing country. And they had a little railway cottage, a tumble-down shack, that's all it was. And they had 6 kids. Now, how they all fitted in that 2-bedroom weatherboard shack, I don't know. I think they had a veranda out the front, and sometimes the kids had to sleep 3 in a bed, head to toe. So if somebody wet the bed, then everybody got wet. But Dad was the fettler on the railway. That's a bloke that actually builds the railway lines, and then he maintains them. He was a tough, wiry little bloke. And then Mum, she used to weigh the wheat, and she was so proud, you know, if you could stand it and listen to her story, she would tell you that she was the first woman in the history of the railways to hold a weighbridge man's licence. So that was her job, apart from travelling on the train up to Coolum to clean the hotel, and then look after all these kids. And at the same time, the whole family, I'm led to believe, they looked after the level crossing. There were no boom gates activated by electricity or whatever. They actually had to open a gate to let the cars through or the horse and carts through. So that was their humble existence before me, and then they moved to the metropolis of Junee, 3,000 people, into an equally humble house. But we got rid of a few of those elder brothers and sisters as they got married, so eventually we got a bedroom of our own. Yeah.
Probably going from the rails with that sort of transport, there's something that we both share that I was reading the book about. I actually read the book when I was flying to Japan, and I was reading a passage where you went into how much you hate flying, and in a strange way, I'm moaning about flying, I was reading about you moaning about flying, and it calmed me a little bit because I thought it must be awful for you. You've obviously had issues with it before in the 80s, but even now, it must be a nightmare.
Yeah, I try to trace back why I'm scared of flying, and I think it comes back to parents. They forget, they talk about things that they themselves might be frightened of. Their phobias, I think that's the right word for them. And we were a railway family, and the railway slogan was, the railway is the safe way, you know. And they'd look up in the sky, Mum and Dad, and see the jet stream, and they'd be saying things like, if you were meant to fly, you'd have wings and all that stuff, you know. So I got this fear ingrained into me around the kitchen table, really. But it wasn't easy to fly to broadcast a football match here or there or wherever. And of course, the major problem with flying for me came in 1984, when I pulled out of the Los Angeles Olympics, because to fly to Brisbane or Melbourne, I was used to that. I mean, you could sit there with the white knuckles and the sweaty hands for an hour and 5 minutes, but Los Angeles, I thought, no, I can't do it. And 2 months before the games, I pulled out. And I've got no doubts now, as I look back, that cost me my job at Channel 10, eventually in 1986.
Yeah.
So it still is a fear, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
But when I got my second chance in 1992, I promised myself, I don't care whether it's a gyrocopter, I will go, you know.
Yeah. And it looks like in the book and when I've heard you speak, you're checking yourself about how lucky you are. You're doing what you love. You're living the dream. You constantly refer to that. And I guess that period after the Olympics where you struggled and you were calling greyhound races and you were looking for a job before Channel 9 came and thankfully got you in and the rest is history. It seems like you're really aware of that time when you're looking back at how good life is now.
Oh, absolutely. You know, somewhere in the book, I'm sure I talk about it was a learning curve. I mean, it was miserable in many ways that I had lost touch with this dream that I'd been living for a little while. You know, I started in Sydney in 69, but I started in the country in 66. So 20 years later, in 86, the fear of flying primarily has cost me my job. And now I'm out in what I call the wilderness in the book. And I'm doing whatever I can to make ends meet, basically. Driving to Dubbo, 4.5 there and 4.5 back, to earn $200 calling 8 races with 16 runners in them, you know. And that included petrol, by the way. And then I was hosting greyhounds on Sky Channel once a week and I hated it. I applied for a job as a garbage man and I got knocked back because they thought I was joking or overqualified, you know. I applied for an orange juice delivery van or something like that. I didn't get that job either. But what it all added up to was just a period of my life that was difficult. My wife and I separated, led to divorce. My mum died. And I thought it was the end of the world. But my sons, Mark and Chris, they kept trying to pick me up and tell me it'll come back. And it did. It came back with a phone call in 1991. And that was Ian Frickberg, and I came back to Channel 9, been there ever since. That was where I always wanted to work anyway, Channel 9. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think I came back as a much better person. You know, I learnt one big thing: nobody's indispensable. You know, I was starting to probably get up myself a little bit, and I learnt from all of that, nobody's indispensable.
And you've seen in that time, you've just blossomed into, you know, the phenomenon you are now, I guess, and you have, you know, girls coming up to you asking you for selfies and guys doing impressions.
That is a story I told you in private, but I had a couple of teenage girls grab me after a match at Cronulla the other day, and they were all over me like a rash, you know.
All in a day's work.
And it couldn't have been my looks that attracted them. It was just the voice, I think. Yeah. Because they all talk about the voice, you know, and they're all trying to do Rabs impersonations. And then this last girl, she said, "Could you poke your tongue out for our photograph?" And I thought, this is getting kinky, you know, this is crazy. Yeah.
So with all those hundreds of games you've seen, who do you think the best player? And I want you to, I want a straight answer here. The best rugby league player is?
Well, I can't give you a straight answer because I've had that many people on top of the throne. I've had that many on the pedestal since I came along to Sydney, I mean. Yeah. I started with Bob Fulton and it became Graham Langlands, and it then became people like Graham Eadie and then Peter Sterling and then Alan Langer. But I think the one that's fixed in my mind most is Wally Lewis. And I think there's only a struck match between Wally and Andrew Johns. Yeah. But Lewis dominated rugby league for a decade at the hardest level of rugby league. That's our epitome. Now to do that, that takes him to me to the top, just in front of Andrew. Yeah.
And what's the best horse you've ever seen run?
Oh, now I can give you a straight answer. I thought Tulloch was just outstanding. Yeah. Tulloch ran 1.5 miles at Caulfield to win the Caulfield Cup in world record time on a grass track as a 3-year-old. And the stopwatch doesn't tell lies. So I have no problem in saying Tulloch. Way back in 1949 though, my favourite horse was Playboy, because Playboy was one of those marbles, and it was the first horse I ever backed in my life. Yeah. It was a maiden in a derby, and maidens aren't supposed to win derbies. Yeah. But I backed it because George Moore was riding it. Yeah. And I was old enough, even then, to know that this was the best jockey in the world, George Moore. and he was writing Playboy, so I'll back Playboy, and Dad let me have sixpence on to shut me up, really. I was in bed with chicken pox. And he was listening to his races with Ken Howard, and I think he just let me have a bet to shut me up. And believe it or not, Mum had gone on the train to Coolaman to an auction sale to buy some galvanised iron for the roof of the house because the roof was leaking. Dad didn't want to get on the train because he got train sick. Can you believe that? He built the railway lines, but he used to get train sick.
You Warrens and your motion sickness.
Strange people, yeah. Very strange people.
And I guess the last question I want to ask. Tomorrow, you don't know about this, but tomorrow there is a gold medal swim, there's a deciding state of origin game, and there's the Melbourne Cup. And you have to call one of those. What are you going to call?
God. That's a very difficult question. Because you've got to understand, my first love was horse racing. That's what I was attracted to, not so much horse racing, but Ken Howard, and being a sports commentator. So my first love obviously was horse racing. And then of course, Rugby League has been there, it's been my bread and butter. Horse racing, they were good people, don't get me wrong, but I didn't make a career so much of race calling. But to call a Melbourne Cup was a wonderful, wonderful dream to have, and I got to do it 3 times.
Yeah.
I suppose I'd have to say you better put me on the Origin match.
Yeah.
Even though I love what I did in swimming, that was just so refreshing to do swimming.
Yeah.
Lovely kids, and I got to call the best batch of swimmers collectively ever to come through in Australia.
Yeah, that's true.
So how can I answer that question simply? I can't. But just to help you, I'll take the Origin match because League has been my mainstay,
Yeah, and long may it continue. I know that you signed a 5-year contract, was it last year? And
that was Gingell. He's my boss at Nine. He said, sign here, it's a 5-year contract. And I said, I can't last 5 years. He said, well, Richie has. And I said, yeah, but Richie's 84, calling cricket. And I said, you've got 9 commentators on the cricket, rotating every 20 minutes. It's 3, then 3, then 3. So Richie works 20 minutes per hour. That's when he wants to go to work.
He floats in and says marvellous.
He does, yeah. So Richie's effort in 20 minutes of work that's a nice shot, Bill. That's a nice shot, Bill. And I invited Gingell. I said, come into the box with me and watch me call a football match. I said, I am going one day just to explode on television. I said, you must have the cameras there the day that I explode, you know. Be a bit like Peter Finch in Network. You know? Yeah.
All right, look, it's been a delight to speak to you, and it's been surreal to speak to someone that I feel like I know so well. Thanks for being here at Booktopia.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to me.
And Ray's book, The Voice, is available from booktopia.com.au right now.